Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, How Millennials and Gen Z are Reshaping Customer Experience. My name is Jetsons Sophian, and I'll be your moderator today. Before I introduce our speakers, I want to let you know that we'll be saving time at the end for Q&A, so feel free to submit your questions at any time, and we'll make sure to address them after the presentation. If for any reason we run out of time before your question is answered, we will follow up with you after the webinar with a response. And now I'd like to introduce our presenters. First, we'll have customer experience consultant, author, and keynote speaker, Micah Solomon, followed by Anand Janefalkar, founder and CEO here at UJET. And now I'll hand it over to Micah to take it away.
Well, thank you so much. My name is Micah Solomon, as Jason very graciously told you. I'm a customer experience and customer service consultant, keynote speaker, author. I have 4 books out. The new one is called Ignore Your Customers and They'll Go Away. And let's get going. Thanks so much, UJET, for the opportunity. So Millennials and Gen Z are the emerging consumer powerhouse. And I am not a demographics expert, but this is approximately what I feel we need to know here. So the numbers that demographers use keep changing a bit, but if you throw Millennials and Gen Z all together, you get a timeline of 1980 to 2012. So I think of Millennials from 1980 to 2000 just because it makes it easy, but the official ending is 1980 to 1996, and then Gen Z starts just right after that, and they go till 2012. The big thing to know is that millennials are a gigantic generation. So you know the story of how the World War II generation, the sailors and the soldiers came back and they embraced their riveting rosies. And I always think it must have been really riveting because within like 4 years they had 2.4 children per couple. So that enormous generation was the baby boom. The baby boom, I'm talking very generally here, started to have kids themselves. And this isn't talked about quite as much, but that generation, the millennials, is even bigger than the baby boomers. And it has, until recently, continued to expand as well through immigration. So we'll see how that goes at this point. But through immigration, it's continued to get bigger. Now, Gen Z worldwide, so these are the youngest consumers that are really being tracked. Gen Z worldwide is the largest generation, but in the U.S., there aren't as many of them as there are millennials. There are approximately as many of them as there are boomers. Now, this is kind of ugly to say, but the boomers will, of course, drop off. So ultimately, both of these generations are going to be much larger than the boomers. The purchasing power of these new generations is huge, and it's growing quickly. So for millennials alone, and right now millennials are really in the marketplace more than Gen Z. So for millennials alone, it's already tied with or slightly ahead of what boomers are spending. Now, boomer spending has not dropped off. It has not dropped off at the speed people thought it would, but the millennials is approximately equal. And that doesn't include all of the corporate spending that they control as they've risen in the business world. So a nice place to look here is business travel. So business travel is a great proxy for a wide range of spending activity. If you go on a plane and you see the people in first class, and most of them have upgraded, those are the business travelers. And then there's many, of course, in coach who are saving up for that upgrade. Business travelers travel much, much more than leisure travelers. And the millennial generation is going to account for nearly 50% of all business flights by the coming year. So that means they're going to equal the spending of all generations other than millennials very soon. So a few things are different. I'm going to talk about this a lot, and Anand's going to talk about this part actually quite a bit as well. Phone has always meant smartphone for them. Now, I said that to millennial, and he came up later after my talk and said, well, not all. So it's true. Almost all for millennials and all for Gen Z. It's meant smartphone. They've always been able to count on having internet, GPS, TripAdvisor, Yelp, PayPal. I would say time moves differently for them due to Amazon same-day shipping and Amazon real-time inventory. We are so beyond the days where if something was available online, seemed to be available, it wasn't actually necessarily available online. PayPal, Venmo, and so forth. Selection has always been different for them. Music, most of their lives has not been limited to what's been on a CD. Shopping has not been limited to what's available locally, and so forth. Now, some of these things are going to sound familiar regardless of your age bracket, and that's why Chris's quote here is so important. You wouldn't think of Four Seasons Hotels as being a millennial brand particularly, but they track millennials very closely, and here's why. They're a group of guests on their own that's important, but their significance is more than that. It's also that they're unique in terms of the impact that they have on the rest of the customer base. So a millennial or a Gen Z who exhibits behavior A on Monday, their older brothers and sisters might exhibit it on Thursday, and then their parents are going to join in the next week, and their grandparents soon after that. There is actually a group on Facebook called My Life's Officially Over. My parents have joined Facebook. But at this point, I think the parents probably have one as well. And what they're really talking about is the grandparents of millennials are now on Facebook as well. So here are 4 principles for engaging with customers in today's new consumer landscape. Number 1, today's customers are, just to test you guys, I put the word customers twice apparently. So today's customers are the enemies of stupid. So what do I mean by that? Well, I mean that you shouldn't be making them call you for what I call stupid stuff. And if I knew my audience better, I might use a different S word there. But this is just stuff that they shouldn't have to call you for. They don't necessarily mind calling you in some context. We're going to talk about that. But they shouldn't be forced to call you because your static FAQ was written by your web person 5 years ago, and it's not up to date. So replace that with something searchable. It can even be AI powered. You shouldn't, little details like when you open and so forth, your return policy, they shouldn't have to call you for that. They should be able to search for it and not have to look very far to get it. And by the way, if Google has your open hours wrong, you need to get it fixed. It's hard to get things fixed with Google, but it's essential because your customer, who are they going to blame? Are they going to blame Google? No, there's no point to blaming Google. They're going to blame you. So get that stuff right, even if it's a third party that is messed up. Now, every business, regardless of your business model, should strive for what I call digital parity. So this is to be as good, as transparent, as easy to use as the best players in e-commerce. So offline businesses that do this are a great example of the Apple Store, right? It's a frictionless experience. There's no paperwork, and there's no real barrier between offline and online. If you want to start this is what is called omni-channel these days. And a little company called UJET can help you with this, but it's what's called omni-channel. So what you buy in person, you can have delivered online or vice versa, and so forth. Another part of digital parity is this idea that online things are nearly unlimited. So Amazon is able to sell some number of thousands per, I think, minute of the latest Nintendo Switch or whatever it is. And my kids can tell you whatever it is better than I can. But then you go into a store and you have to wait in line to pay for stuff. Why do you have to wait in line? Well, partly because, and maybe largely because we have this idea that there needs to be a queue. There's this cash wrap idea. And just get rid of that. Give your employees a tablet and let them ring up customers wherever they are, because that is getting you closer to digital parity. They expect you to be channel agnostic. This is more on the omni-channel idea. Meet them where they are, move with them as they want to move. and have all of their info so they never need to repeat themselves. Now, the classic example of this is needing to repeat your credit card. However, that's a bit of a red herring because it is a security, it is partly a security principle that they're making you repeat it. But that is the one that sticks in everyone's craw. And if there are points like that in your business, try not to have the customer have to repeat themselves. They expect you to protect them from themselves, to anticipate likely missteps. So I don't think there's a Gen Z out there who has a bank account, and there aren't that many that do at this point, but or a millennial, and most of them do have bank accounts where they actually balance their checkbook. Jason, if you have audio, do you balance your checkbook?
I don't even have a checkbook.
So there you go. So he doesn't even have a checkbook. So how can you do this? Well, you can do this, and Jason, correct me if I'm wrong, because the bank protects you from yourselves. You get this is from SunTrust, a very large bank. This warns you if you're getting below a point that you have noted. So this screenshot, I think, is for someone they probably requested that a warning be sent below $200. So they've been warned. So businesses are protecting you from themselves. And this is the funniest example I can come up with. Maybe it's not the most practical example, but there was a subsection of Gmail called Google Labs, and these are things that engineers had come up with their own, and you can add them to Gmail. And this one was easily my favorite, even though I don't drink. But conceptually, this is my favorite. It's called Mail Goggles. And Mail Goggles is obviously a riff on beer goggles. And some geeks with a drinking problem or drunks with a geeking problem clearly came up with this. This is if you tend to drink too much between certain hours, let's say Friday nights and Saturday nights, and if you were online, that would be the time when you would really be tempted to tell your boss exactly what you think of her. And maybe that is not ideal thinking. So this protects you from yourself, but because it was designed by engineers, it does it through math. This is set for math that I might have trouble with if I was very, very incapacitated, but you can have it set so you have to do calculus or whatever is a challenging level for you. Principle 2, and this is very much on all of our minds, customers sometimes want humans to stay out of their way. They want us to stay out of their way. And the question is when. So I like to use my unauthorized Jetsons test, which is just a little test to get us thinking about which service functions belong on which side of the human digital divide. So Jason, I guess you're going to be my test here. Have you heard of the Jetsons?
I have heard of the Jetsons, yes.
Okay, thank you. So the Jetsons are one of these things that seems to cross generations. The show was broadcast in 1963, I think, and it takes place 100 years in the future, so 2063. Now, the Jetsons is actually, in spite of getting a bunch of things wrong, like it's extremely sexist, and people smoke in the future, which I like to think by 2063 they won't be. But other than those, they get a ton of things right. So I looked into this. How do they get so much right? Because they had a bunch of very clever futurists working with them. So let's look at the Jetsons test. So much of the Jetsons customer experience is provided by machines. Secretaries don't take dictation. Instead, and I love how they got this almost right, they predicted everything but the internet. Secretaries don't take dictation. Instead, callers call in and leave their message on, this is my favorite thing ever, a rewritable vinyl LP. So that is so close, right? They almost nailed it. You can make a push-button breakfast. Of course, something has to go wrong because it's a sitcom, right? But push-button breakfast that you can order in bed. And housekeeping via Rosie the robot, who's perfect because she's animatronic and she has a New York accent and an attitude to match. So human-delivered service adds warmth and a bit of what I call palace intrigue. So it's not that you don't have a receptionist, it's that she offers southern accented warmth when you come in to the office. Henry, who's pictured here, he's ostensibly he fixed things in their ultra skyrise, building, but really he's just a friend of the family, and he rescues the dog whose name all of us say it together, Astro. At least all of us boomers say it together. When Astro gets lost, Henry finds him. And there are occasional cab drivers. They didn't predict Uber and Lyft, but occasional cab drivers and such who provide human interaction and laughs. So this is a useful way to divide the customer experience. If customer service, the customer experience can be delivered more efficiently via automation or self-service, at least offer that as an option. Now, I don't think generally it should be the only option, and there are exceptions, because it may be challenging for people with disabilities, may be challenging for your very, very, very best customers too, who want a really personalized experience. But at least offer it as an option. On the other hand, if the service in question requires or benefits from human warmth, have humans deliver it. I like to think that that's what Anand and Jason and I are doing right now, right? We are giving you not exactly a self-service webinar. We are providing some human warmth. We're doing a spectacular job on these touch point moments. And there are great examples of companies that have eliminated automation from key touch points. My favorite is Singapore Airlines, and you guys need to take a junket to check this out for me, because I haven't actually been able to expense that yet. But Singapore Airlines, I hear, in their business class, it's not like other business class carriers where it's essentially a push-button bed, everything's ready, and you tuck yourself in. Instead, they designed their business, this is just amazing, they designed their business class cabins to require the intervention of the flight attendant. So they have to turn over your mattress and fluff up your pillow a little bit. And this is not a wrong decision. This is not a right decision. It's a decision. They felt that they should not take the human touch out of that. Now, more common, I think, is if you can bridge this with what I call a triangular approach. So a customer's interaction might start with AI. Kind of need a visual for this. It might start with the agent, but what you're doing is everything's working together. So you can start via AI. One of my favorite examples of AI as a starting point is a dynamic search bar where it doesn't even feel like AI to the customer, or a chatbot. Then they can be moved over to a human agent when things get tricky. But the AI or the system that's working behind the scenes can continue to help behind the scenes. The human can say, well, I'm going to pass you off to my friendly assistant, my friendly robotic assistant, or more likely, the AI can be filling in details like tracking numbers. So here's what it looks like. That's the customers. It's a bunch of obviously stock people, and then we have the stock agent, and we have the AI or the other high tech system that's happening. And I thought that this would be a good point for Anand, who is Mr. UJET, to talk about this a little bit.
Yeah, I think I very much agree with you on the human aspect of this. I mean, after all, we're servicing human customers, right? And we strongly believe that the human touch is really unparalleled when it comes to a conversation with an existing customer and keeping them loyal and developing a brand loyalty, but also a potential customer who has lots of choices. And I'll touch on each of these points in my slides later on. But to directly address what Micah is saying here is that really what history has shown is that automation and innovation going together always succeeds. And then you leave the non-mechanical or kind of intense calculation part aside, and we have machines and AI do that. But the empathy experience and the intuition of how to judge a particular moment in a customer journey can never, at least in today's technology, can never be done better than humans. So that is our concept of AI and IA. So intelligent automation along with artificial intelligence that we combine to call assisted AI.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. So I think that the Jetsons test and the way Anand talks about it is just right. And the other thing about this is every customer is different. Now, it's tricky to set up your business model to treat every customer differently. Five-star hotels absolutely aim to treat every customer differently. And companies with a few high-volume customers do that as well. That should be the goal unless the cost is prohibitive. But generally, it should be the goal, but you're going to do it in clever ways, probably by a combination of human, AI, and IA. Point 3 is that you can win with today's customers by helping them collect and share social currency. So it used to be that there was a before, a during, and after in shopping and in travel. By the way, those of you who haven't seen Mad Men or don't watch the History Channel, I need to explain what's going on in this picture. So that is called a slide carousel. And Don Draper and his best friend and his best friend's wife, who's going to be his future, or maybe at this point his current girlfriend, but don't let that stuff distract you. Side plot point. This is a Kodak carousel. It plays slides. So what happened in the old days is that you would dream about taking a vacation, you'd decide where to go, and you would save the money for that. And you would do this all on your own. And then you wouldn't involve your neighbors, your friends, into the experience until it was over. And then you would strong arm your neighbors over, and they would come watch these slides, which were shot on with your camera, a limited number. Maybe you take 48 pictures if you had plenty of money on your trip, and that would be that. But it's not how it works anymore. Customers are sharing all the time. They share during an operation as long as they're not under general anesthetic. It's all the time. Even during the saving money, what I get during the saving money part for a vacation, I get these GoFundMe requests. And, I will pay for a GoFundMe request when it's cancer. But if it's to save for your vacation, I pretty much have the reaction, go fund yourself, buddy. But during that, and certainly during the deciding where to go on your vacation, you involve everybody else. So speaking of five-star hotels, Hervé, who's one of the wonderful founders of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel Company, says 8-10 years ago, so at this point it's like 12, 14 years ago, it was common for luxury guests to travel all over the world and accumulate possessions and ship them home in a cart. Now, we've kind of only seen this in Citizen Kane, right? Citizen Kane, where the Hearst character has had that done. But this was normal for Hervé's specific group of travelers. Now they travel for the experience. They travel for the engagement. And this is true across demographics. A much simpler way to put it is, if it's not on my phone, it didn't happen. This is what every millennial and every G says, right? And it's true for their older brothers and their parents as well, more and more. If it's not on my phone, it didn't happen. So why do customers share? One reason is to achieve social status. So status used to be you would drive a Chevy, and then you're supposed to be moved up to a Cadillac, and then if you were the particular kind of customer, you would move on to a Corvette. Or it used to be first you would have a Ford, and then you would have a Lincoln. But for today's shoppers, it doesn't work like that. Status can be achieved by collecting, as I call it, and sharing experiences. So brands can succeed by facilitating that experience and making it easy to share. So this is a very obvious and, at the time, revolutionary example, actually. This is called the 1888 Hotel in Sydney. And it is colloquially, congenially referred to as the Instagram Hotel, because they give you, and this was at the time revolutionary, they give you a whole map of where great Instagram places are in Sydney. So the hotel becomes the backdrop for that. And every room is different, and other grammars have been there before. So it becomes, as we say these days, a thing. It becomes a thing. for Instagrammers. And to make it really, really obvious, and I totally love it, in the lobby there's an enormous frame. So the point is made. Now, you don't have to be as obvious as this to have customers share social currency, but it's a very good principle for most every kind of business. I wouldn't go crazy with this if you are a hospital, but just be aware that they're doing it anyway. So keep that in mind. Now, another way to help customers gain social currency is to involve them with improving your company. So Alex at Dropbox gave me this comment, which I think is right on. So with young customers, a new brand, service, or product is only started by those young customers. I started by you. It is finished by the young customers. These are generations that want to co-create. My son, who's Gen Z, is always telling me, Dad, you need to make that suggestion to company X. And if he were a little older, like his sisters and millennials, she'd be making the suggestions herself directly. So companies that understand this, you get a lot of engagement from these customers. And if you're open to it, you get a lot of insights as well. It's very powerful. Adobe has a concept which is curate before we create. So they look for a power user online who has already solved a complex question. They bless that question, as they call it, and they give that person some badges for being a power user of Photoshop or whatever it is. My final principle is what I call the cliff of dissatisfaction. You need to be very aware of this. A cliff of dissatisfaction is a confidential proprietary metric that Starbucks has, and it's the time it takes before customers will lose faith in a company on its ability to match their timeline. So this picture is in, I think, Hong Kong. So clearly those customers are more used to waiting. So the metric's probably different there, probably different in every market actually. But if they're taking too long, they do things to give you the impression that it's sped up. They come out and see if there's anything they can get started for you and so forth. And clearly it figures into their business model. When people have been falling off the cliff of dissatisfaction on a regular basis, what do? They open another one right next door down the street. Cleveland Clinic was getting a lot of pushback for how long it took to schedule things, so they started this initiative. And now if you call, don't do this, but if you call before 4 p.m. Ohio time, which is Eastern time, you'll get a message like this. Thank you for calling Cleveland Clinic. Would you like to be seen today? And it's quite mind-blowing, but they are no longer losing patients due to them falling off the cliff of dissatisfaction. Again, it's the perceived timeliness that matters, that you are matching an expectation the customer had. And Domino's does this quite well. They used to do this with this 30-minute delivery guarantee, but they were, it's not actually funny, but they were permanently disabling or even killing too many pedestrians. So they eliminated this guarantee. What they've got now is the Domino's Pizza Tracker, which gives you almost too much information about the state of your pizza. So leaving things on pizza, which is it's getting towards midday, at least in some time zones, I am going to yield to Anand, whose last name I just learned how to pronounce. It's Janefalkar. I think that's pretty much right? Anand Janefalkar. If not, please correct us. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Micah. Actually, any way you pronounce it that gets my attention is good, but I think it's, I need to tell Jason about this later, but it's Janefalkar.
Oh no, Janefalkar.
But anyway, it's all good. And actually, I've written you're not the only one that was confused by just looking at the spelling of my last name. That was actually what inspired me to start UJET. And there's a decently written blog about this if you look at our blog page. But thanks again for handing this over to me, and thanks everyone for attending this webinar. I think a lot of ways that we look at just transformation of technology as technologists and kind of the macro trends that happen, a lot of times they have to do with technology as well as generations. And the way we look at especially current technology and Gen Z and millennials is that the quintessential device today is the smartphone, and it does a bunch of different things that people take for granted, and this includes the APIs like location, time of the day automatically understanding where the time zones are calculated, on and off the service hours, so on and so forth. And I'm keeping these a little more relevant to the customer experience side. But what millennials and Gen Zs use, they use this as their portal to the information world and the internet. And they're arguably using it for a lot more than just making phone calls. In fact, sometimes way more than making phone calls. So let's analyze this and how this kind of rolls into the customer experience. When you look at Generation Mobile, it is essentially looking at millennials, Gen Zs, where almost everyone has at least one smartphone. There are areas where people might have multiple, one for work, one for personal, or they might have a add-on device like a tablet or so on and so forth. And this is very much different from the generational change where a lot of people thought how music changed from the Walkmans to the iPods or Microsoft Zunes for brand diversity. And this is a lot more sweeping. And what that allows to is it is the fastest growing platform across the world, but it's also the biggest platform for consuming services. So let's take an example of how this affects very much what would be considered as a rudimentary chore several years ago, laundry. One of our customers, Cleanly, they're based in Brooklyn. Amazing service where under 24 hours they will. Yep.
Cleanly. Okay, excellent.
Right. And there's some other services that are also here in the Bay Area and different parts of the country, but under 24 hours, they'll pick up your laundry in a personalized bag, which you can hang outside the door, clean it, fold it, return it, under 24 hours. And all you have to do is use your smartphone. And you can take photos of if there's any damage, if something didn't get clean the way that you wanted to. And this is an example of how customers are accessing the entire service just through the app. This is not picking up the phone and calling someone. This is not going into a website. So what is important for creating a very hyper-personalized customer experience and creating brand loyalty here is to meeting them at that connection point. And that's what UJET brought to the table when we partnered with them, is that since your entire service is consumed within the app, it makes sense to not have support the only tab in your app that throws you outside the app experience, because that creates the first level of disconnect, which is you sign up for the service with an email and not with your phone number most of the time. Several other services I sign with my email and never provide a phone number. And that kind of keeps the experience within the brand. And that's how it becomes a statement for a company to say that service and customer support is an integral part of the product, brand, and service. Earlier, we touched upon mobile banking, which is also very similar, which a few years ago would have been considered as you have to go to the bank. There's also a funny commercial, I believe, with one of the lenders where you have to put a suit and tie and then go and request a bank loan. Fast forward to today, you can do that with just an app. So to take a look at the measurable metrics, how this really changed when the Cleanly's customers were met at the connection point in the app, this reduced call wait times by 11 minutes and increased customer satisfaction score by 13%. And you'll see that this is a recurring theme. Micah spoke about Cleveland Clinic. You may look at some research reports as far back as 2005 with Bank of America and Harris. And everyone says that the number one reason why people get frustrated is because of hold times, having to wait for the right representative, replying to generic scripts, and when you get transferred, you have to repeat everything. The reason for that is because there is no smart pipe between the end user as well as the agent that is servicing this customer. And today, with smartphones and the web, we can bridge that gap with UJET specifically with our iOS and Android SDKs as well as the web SDKs. So we touched a little bit on personalization, but let's take a little deeper look on what that exactly means. And at UJET, we very much are meticulous about the user experience and the consumer DNA. The human angle is very, very important, which I think has been void in enterprise software for several decades. So if you look at the cocktail party effect, we'll look at the social aspect of this and how this relates to the online marketplace. So during a cocktail, there's several people, there's a lot of noise around, but all of that noise just becomes white noise till you kind of meet a person or someone calls your name, and then you immediately, your ears perk up, you basically have your frequency alignment, and then you start that conversation. Despite someone might be super loud in the background, you are zoned in and are having a very specific conversation there because you feel this is hyper-personalized for you. The same effect can be achieved with when you log into an app or you log into the website for a particular brand. And that is kind of what we take and combine that with the consumer DNA that we have to roll out products. What that essentially means, and Micah also touched on this a little bit, is if you were looking at enterprise software or any kind of customer experience maybe 10, 15 years ago, it was expected for you to read a manual, know how things work before even starting to use the service. Fast forward to today, and you can call it the millennial effect, or you just call it that the lack of time or impatience, which I actually think is a positive thing. People don't want to read manuals. In fact, the most successful gadgets, products, software is where you don't have to read a manual. I don't remember reading a manual for when I started using my first smartphone, and I'm sure several of you haven't. There might be some deep details where you might need to refer a guide or two, but largely, we at UJET, we term this as a soft landing user experience. What a soft landing means is you present the persona. In our case, it's the end user, agent, advocate, or customer service representative, and the contact center manager. You present the product experience to them. They wouldn't have to read a manual, and they can start utilizing it immediately. That also means the time to market, and we are known to have customers that would just log into our web adapter using their email, no downloads, no hardware required or anything else, and start utilizing our service in all three connection channels, which would be traditional telephony, the in-app experience, and the in-web experience. So taking this one step further, what we're essentially trying to say is that in a crowded online marketplace, where in certain sectors, actually the only differentiation is the customer experience. And that's why the hyper-personalization is super important. And the information about your account might be in several disparate databases, and having a solution that kind of takes this together and presents that holistic 360-degree view of the customer to an agent to either service their query or to provide them the right solution or SKU of the product is extremely important. So training your agents for that, in addition to having a soft landing approach to the tools that they use, is extremely important. So we already spoke about the self-service options a little bit. That's where AI and IA comes in, where there might be certain things which is they can be very elegantly achieved by deflecting, we call it channel steering here at UJET, by channel steering them to either a notification like Micah showed about the SMS, or a structured FAQ where it's like, hey, how do I add a data plan on my tablet onto my phone account? Stuff like that. There are structured FAQs for it. So you can have the user kind of transfers those pages first before getting connected to a live agent, where again, the empathy, intuition, and experience kind of kicks in to kind of seal the deal if it's an upsell or kind of solve the issue to retain the customer. And then lastly, what we're going to talk about here is why this generation and the way we consume technology today really requires a tech-savvy contact center. In sectors specifically like healthcare, financial, like banking and all that, a lot of times it is the experience that keeps you there because there's just so many choices, and a lot of these being regulated, there's really not that much difference in the offering per se. So being able to have intelligent routing, which again takes into consideration whether you are in a certain location, what your preferences are, and you can relate this back to the flying experience that Micah was talking about, is whether your preference is an aisle or a window, whether you prefer a stop or not. If you do prefer a stop, where should that be? And those things can be achieved with intelligent routing. One of the examples that we often give is if you booked a ticket, you're at the gate trying to kind of board the flight, but there's some sort of delay or a cancellation, then rather than standing in line, which is probably fairly long right now at the ticket counter, when you start a conversation from within your app, the experience with intelligent routing and conversational AI can be like, hey, Jason or Micah, we saw that you're flying to Columbus, Ohio, and sorry that the flight has been delayed or canceled, but I see that you just did a search to go to Cleveland and a stopover in Denver. Would you like me to process that instead? With that kind of conversation, you've pretty much earned a customer for life. And that is what intelligent routing, concurrent data dips can do. On the flip side of it, the staffing, the setup, the curation methodology of a contact center is extremely important. This is what the third persona, the contact center manager or director, is responsible for. One of the things that is extremely critical is the staffing and the change in staffing. There are specific SLAs that every contact center needs to meet. These can be answering 90% of the calls or chats within 30 seconds, not having a wait time of over 10 or 15 minutes. And for that, integration into workforce management systems, quality management systems, and all of those are extremely important. And it becomes a very belabored process if these are not out-of-the-box integrations. So at UJET, we pride ourselves with being a contact center out of the box. So if you're on popular CRMs like Zendesk, Salesforce, Microsoft Dynamics, and so on, as well as you use any workforce management tools like the Variants, Teleoptis of the world, so on and so forth, this becomes the onboarding experience and the integration should not become like a huge task. This should happen pretty much out of the box, and tons of our customers have already utilized that. So that's how we kind of think about the human aspect, the front end, the AI and IA integration, as well as the integration with the allied technologies for the contact center. And that's pretty much it. Micah?
No, that's great. Thank you, Anand. Thank you, Micah. So we have some time for questions here. I'd like to remind everyone, if you do have any questions, feel free to drop those, into the comments whenever you'd like, and we will be sure to get those answered. So, Micah, I want to start with you. Today we've talked all about Millennials and Gen Z. And how they're, the emerging and the dominant demographics out there. So how can I begin tailoring my experience towards them without alienating my elder customers?
Well, I think that mostly you're going to improve the experience for elder customers if you incorporate a concern for what the younger customers have brought to the table. So I think speeding things up, and by that I don't mean putting a parking meter by the table in your restaurant, but speeding up how quickly you greet people in that same restaurant scenario, not making them wait to pay in the restaurant. I think if you get this stuff right for Gen Z and millennials, it's mostly going to help older people. However, nobody likes change until they change on their own on their own volition. So nobody really likes to be forced to change, and I would often offer these new ideas as an option until you bring them in as something that is really central in your model. So I think that's generally it. I think offering various options, thinking of the positives that these new, and realize that millennials and Gen Z, every one of them is different as well, just as older people are different. For example, a lot of millennials, even though you wouldn't think this, have disabilities. And so everything working at a high speed is not going to necessarily be good for them. So you always need to be considering different segments of your audience, regardless of their age.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I wanted to add two quick things over there. I think the way we should look at millennials and Gen Zs as a demographic is trend creators. And the trends that they're creating are definitely becoming very much the norm. And these are not fads. I mean, the way they interact with technology and the way they are pretty much shaping how companies are offering products is becoming a trend and then becomes the norm. So it really helps pretty much any generation to go that route. The second one is essentially to have that fluid omnichannel experience. You really cannot alienate any demographic. And this doesn't necessarily go with an age group or just being digitally acquainted. It just goes with, if people are used to calling for decades, you can't try and shove down just a messaging service. And that's why omnichannel is so important, is that you need to meet the customer at the connection point that they want. And that's why meeting them in a traditional telephony or IVR system is important. And then having that same system provide an equally elegant, efficient, and secure chat or SMS or channel steering towards self-serve or email is also, I think, very critical.
Great. So we have a question that came in from Paolo, and I'll pose this to both of you, and Anand, I'll start with you. So, we've been looking at millennials and Gen Z and how they behave as consumers, but should we be taking those behaviors and implementing them and making adjustments within our own workforce when looking at millennials as employees?
I would say absolutely. Again, look at this kind of demographic as trend creators. I'm kind of just repeating what I said earlier, but your employees are also consumers, right? And if you're kind of putting out a product which is catered towards servicing any of these demographics, your employees that fall within that group are going to give you honest feedback. And what can be even more exciting is they can be part of the product ideation. And that is where we get excited, is that not only do we kind of look for consumer DNA, but we look for a lot of diversity in terms of not only design sentiment, kind of preferences, but also different sectors. I mean, arguably, if you look at disruption in technology in general, you need to have an extremely open view before entering and trying to disrupt a sector. and that's kind of how I would look at it.
Great.
All right,
and Micah?
Okay. So, I mean, the first thing I want to say is that there is a lot of talk about millennials as employees, and it's an extremely important issue. In fact, they're talked about more, I think, as employees than as customers. But the two are not really separate. There's no wall between them. Paolo, I see you work at Netflix. Hello. Thank you for everything you do for me and for all the spare time that I no longer have. I really appreciate it. So first of all, Netflix is a brilliant example of tailoring how you can tailor a business literally to every single customer differently, right? I mean, you can. So I mean, that is one of the early examples of this, actually. So in answer to your question, I would say a couple of things. I would say one of the most obvious revolutions with Gen Z and millennials is the mobile revolution, and so that is really part of the reason UJET is sponsoring this webinar, is because meeting employees where they are with the technology they use is so important. Riffing on that a little bit as well, I think we need to be aware that what I would call consumer grade technology is sometimes the best. And I know that this sounds counterintuitive to those of us who think of consumer grade camera lenses as being, the crud that is attached to your, I don't know how many of you are photographers, but consumer grade means it's junk. Semi-pro means it's semi-junk, and pro means it's the best historically. But you got to turn that around nowadays, because there is nothing more intuitive than, and I don't want to step on any toes here, there's nothing more intuitive than Gmail, right? And so forth and so on. And this is what all of us, but even more the younger generations, are used to. And if you can find a way to, number one, allow them to use these consumer-grade devices and processes and systems, that's great. And number two, when you build one, you want to ape the UI, right? It's not cool anymore to come up with your own neat AI. You need to make it look like, well, Netflix is, right? There you go. And when I said AI, I meant UI. Sorry.
Great. Thank you, Micah. So we have a question from Mitchell. And Micah, I'm going to pose this I'll start with you on this one. So Mitchell works in the telecoms industry, and while they don't have any physical products that they sell, their product is really all about reliability and consistent service. So how do their customers build social credit with those kinds of products?
So I think that I wouldn't make that the first focus of improving your customer experience, the idea of having them share social currency. I would more make it clear internally that you understand within your company that everyone is going to be talking about you. They're going to talk about you when you mess up. They're going to talk about you when you do fine. They may talk about you when you do fine, and they're definitely going to talk about you when you do great, when you wow them. So if reliability is your main selling point, then that might be tricky to use the idea of social currency as a centerpiece of what you do. But I think there's a lot of other stuff that you can do to improve or at least refresh the customer experience that I hope you can take away from this webinar.
Yeah, I mean, what I think over there is the reliability and uptime, especially in something as core as telecommunications, which again has become the de facto way how we communicate with people and other humans. That is super important. And especially if you're saying, Mitchell, that reliability and consistent service is kind of what you are investing in to create a loyal brand following, then you really need to make sure that investment is available, right? So if you're investing all of that training, marketing, and into kind of saying that our service is reliable and consistent, you can't really back it up with data if It is not. So you want to have systems on the back end which will let you have really intelligent routing, smart deflections to make sure your agents are staffed efficiently, because they can't create loyal customers if they're not being presented and routed to the right channels. And that is what I would kind of say is a way to differentiate yourself in a crowded market.
Great. Thank you both. So it looks like we probably have time for one last question, and I'd like to get both your thoughts on this. And Micah, I'll start with you. The quote you provided, if it's on my phone, it didn't happen. I think really some.
If it's not on my phone.
If it's not on my phone, yes, really sums up, Millennial and Gen Z customers down to a T. So I think looking even further out, we hear a lot about IoT and connected devices. I'd love to get your thoughts on, the impact that those types of technologies will have on the customer experience moving forward.
Could I just send this one over to Anand? I think he's going to talk about it maybe even better than I would. Is that possible?
Go for it, Anand.
Way to put me on the spot. I think the way to look at the smartphone is really different from even where it was 10 years ago. I think arguably you could think that your portal or entry point to the information world maybe 15 years ago would be a Ethernet port, could be a router, could be even like a television. It was also a good kind of portal to that. But today, regardless of pretty much of which devices you have, you might have a smartwatch, you might have a tablet, you might have a step counter, so on and so forth. You might even have media devices that are connected to your TV that might be operated through an app on your smartphone, and the app on your smartphone is the one that's connected to the internet, whether it's over 3G, 4G, the upcoming 5G, or Wi-Fi. And that is how I think we should look at the phone's no longer a phone. The phone is the entry point. It's kind of the gatekeeper, the portal to the internet. And what it needs to do on a very basic level is harmoniously work with all of the devices that are tethered, connected to it. I mean, now, if you have one of the newer cars, you can immediately get your car to become a smart car with Apple CarPlay and Android Autoplay. So looking at the phone as a device that connects you to the information world, and IoT as things that are very specific in their function that, again, automate a lot of the experiences that you want to have. That's kind of how I would put it. And Micah, you're welcome to add anything to that.
The only thing I want to add is don't be fooled. Don't be fooled. If you're talking on your speakerphone in your car, don't be fooled that you're giving your full attention to your driving. Just FYI. If you don't believe me, the New York Times and Consumer Reports did these simulations where it was hands-free, and the drivers thought they were doing just great, and the test results showed they weren't doing so great. So just for what it's worth, I know I'm putting my finger in the holding back progress by saying this, but just FYI.
Perfect. So that's going to bring us. So that's going to bring us just about to the top of the hour here. I'd like to thank both Micah and Anand for all their insights and expertise. And I'd also like to thank everyone for joining us today. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Yeah, have a great day, everyone.